Good afternoon, everybody here in the hall and online. Simon Smith, I'm the British Ambassador here to the Republic of Korea. I'm extremely grateful to Mr. Lee Dong-kun, President of the Global Compact Network Korea, to former UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon, Honorary President of the network, and to Ambassador Park Sung-bum, the Secretary General of the network, for inviting me to address the Korea Leaders Summit 2020. As you have just heard, we are less than 1 year away from COP26. And for those of you still unfamiliar with the terminology, COP26 means the 26th meeting of the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. So in November 2021, world leaders will gather in Glasgow to take decisions that will have a huge impact on the lives of our children and grandchildren. One could argue that framing COP26 in this way is too melodramatic, but for many people, the threat of climate change is entirely existential. So ahead of the meeting in Glasgow, the United Kingdom, on behalf of the UN Secretary General, will be encouraging all countries to reduce their emissions with the ambition of limiting global temperature increases to well below 2 degrees Celsius. The objective we'll be urging them to meet is to limit the increase to just 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels. Now, this is a significant challenge. As things stand, global emission trajectories indicate that we are most likely to hit, at a minimum, 3 degrees Celsius of warming by the year 2100. So achieving 2 degrees of warming, let alone 1.5, is going to need more ambition from large emitting countries. The difference between 1.5 and 2 degrees Celsius may sound insignificant, but it is, however, very significant. At 1.5 degrees, 14% of the global population is exposed to extreme heat at least once every 5 years. At 2 degrees, this 14% becomes 37%. At 1.5 degrees of warming, the Arctic will see ice-free summers once every 100 years. But at 2 degrees, it will be once every 10 years. So at COP26, leaders will set out how they will reduce greenhouse gas emissions to avert the very worst of the impending climate crisis. And when I say leaders, I don't just mean leaders of government, I mean leaders of communities, and I mean leaders of business. The world today is almost 1 degree Celsius warmer than it was at the dawn of the Industrial Revolution. We are already seeing the physical manifestations of this change appearing with increasing regularity and magnitude. So think back to the fires that we saw in California and Siberia and Australia this year. Think back to Korea's own summer of unprecedented monsoon conditions and the multiple typhoons and the damage and the loss of life that followed. I, like many others, feel that these new normals are here to stay, but without more action, there is worse to come. Fortunately, the world is beginning to take action. In July, we were encouraged by the launch in Korea of the Green New Deal, and in October the news was even more encouraging, with President Moon's commitment to net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2050. Now, this net zero announcement followed closely on the heels of carbon neutrality commitments from China and Japan. So as we can see, East Asian climate leadership has provided reassurance that we may well find the requisite ambition in Glasgow next year to head off the very worst possible scenarios in the climate crisis. But whilst congratulating Korea and President Moon on the 2050 net zero ambition, I also want to use today's platform to ask for more action now. And in particular, I want to call for more action from Korea's biggest companies. There are two arguments for business leaders to drive climate ambition. First, as our experience in the United Kingdom tells us, it is not possible for a country to reach net zero without the full engagement of business and financial decision makers. But second, and where I'm going to focus the thrust of my remaining time today, corporate engagement with the net zero challenge is ultimately about ensuring a sustainable and successful future for your business. I'll start with the proposition that the technology which drove growth in the 20th century will not drive growth in the 21st century. The United Kingdom legislated for 2050 net zero emissions through its Climate Change Act in 2019, in the full knowledge that between 1990 and 2018, we had, as a nation, reduced emissions by 43%, while simultaneously growing the economy by 75%. The United Kingdom has demonstrated that there's absolutely no contradiction between decarbonising the economy and economic growth. And we recognise the immense commercial opportunity in the transition to a low-carbon economy. And that's why we've been so vocal in arguing that the global recovery from COVID-19 must be a green recovery. Because if recovery simply means going back to the way we used to do things, then we are on a path to disaster. COVID-19 has shown us that the economics of fossil fuels are unsustainable, with renewables now cheaper than new coal plants. And so the economic case for a faster energy transition is now stronger than ever. An investment in coal today is an investment in a stranded asset tomorrow. In the United Kingdom, we have reduced the proportion of coal in our energy mix from 40% in 2012 to just 2% this year, and by 2024, we will phase out coal completely. And only last week, the UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson laid out his 10-point plan for a green recovery from COVID-19. He announced that the UK would create 40 gigawatts of offshore wind capacity, sufficient to power every home in the UK by 2030. And he confirmed that also by 2030, there would be no new petrol and diesel cars sold in the UK. Now, this announcement, coming as it does from one of the largest car markets in Europe, is significant. But although we are the first G7 country to make this kind of commitment, we will not be the last. The European Union is working up its own proposals, and the UK is looking forward to working closely with President-elect Biden to tackle climate change over the next 4 years. The world is now on an unstoppable path to decarbonisation. It's happening at increasing speed, and as business leaders, I'm sure you will agree that you need to prepare for that journey. Because I predict that change will be required much more quickly than many of us in this room and online expect. In the region of 200,000 cars are annually exported from Korea to the UK, and over 1 million to each of the European Union and to the United States. 10% of jobs in Korea are estimated to be connected to the automotive industry. So in order to remain an export powerhouse, the Korean automotive industry will have to look really carefully at the pace at which it completes its transition from the manufacture of petrol and diesel vehicles to vehicles which are zero emission and can be exported and sold in key markets such as the UK, the EU, and the US in the future. And this is an addition to satisfying a consumer base in Korea, which is embracing the potential of fuel cell EVs and battery EVs with greater appetite than any other market in Asia. So why will change need to take place so quickly? First, because the world's biggest companies will quickly come under pressure from investors who wish to understand how businesses are transitioning to the realities of a net zero world. The world's biggest emitters are already under huge pressure to increase the quantity and improve the quality of climate disclosures in line with the recommendations of the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures, or TCFD. Now, TCFD encourages companies to make judgments and disclose information on the resilience of their business in the transition to a net zero world. So imagine you are a company which in 2020 manufactures a petrol car. The TCFD framework encourages that company to explain to its investors how they plan to remain profitable when it will be no longer possible to sell that same product in the world's most developed markets. Secondly, the pressure to decarbonize global supply chains will increase. Some of the world's biggest companies, such as Apple, have pledged that they will have net zero supply chains by 2030. So the pressure is now on the world's biggest semiconductor manufacturers to decarbonize their supply chains. And this is something we are seeing across every industry. And finally, we have pressure from citizens. Global consumers everywhere are demanding more action now from both governments and businesses. Consumers in a net zero world are increasingly sensitive to a company's climate credentials. So when buying the latest smartphone or television, consumers care whether that same company is also simultaneously investing in fossil fuels, financing, planning to build coal power stations, or investing in other activities which are perpetuating the climate crisis. So business has an absolutely key role to play in achieving net zero. But they also have a key role in engaging with the challenges of net zero in order to ensure their own survival and success into the future. And that's why we are putting so much emphasis on ensuring that business leaders are present at COP26. So my concluding word is to encourage you to embrace the vision of a net zero society, but just as importantly, to drive proactively the transition to a net zero world for your own profit and prosperity. As the president of COP26, the United Kingdom looks forward to working with businesses across the world, addressing what is the biggest economic challenge so far of the 21st century. And yes, I choose my words carefully. This is a bigger economic challenge than anything that the very significant setback of COVID-19 has thrown at us so far. If we think that COVID-19 has been difficult, then we are in for a big shock unless we join together to take effective action on climate change. But at the same time, effectively tackling the climate crisis could also open up what is the biggest economic opportunity of the 21st century. So, in conclusion, I urge all business leaders to focus on how they will get from where we are now to a net zero emissions world, to focus on how to tackle this immense problem, but also how to take what is an immense opportunity. Thank you very much.